Every year when we read Parshat Shlach, I find myself feeling a little sympathy for the spies. The traditional reading casts the 10 spies as villains. They are the generation that failed, the pessimists, the ones who lost faith, the reason our ancestors wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. In contrast, Joshua and Caleb are the heroes. But the more that I read the story, the more complicated it becomes. After all, Moses asked them to do a reconnaissance mission, go into the land, look around, tell him what they saw. And what do they report? The people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. They bring back fruit so enormous that it takes 2 men to carry a single cluster of grapes. And everything they report is true. The land was fertile, the cities were fortified, the inhabitants were strong. They were reporting reality. Their failures lie somewhere else. The difference between the 10 spies and Joshua and Caleb was not that they saw different facts. It was the 10 spies looked at the obstacles and concluded, we cannot do this. But Joshua and Caleb looked at the obstacles and said, this will be difficult. This will be very difficult, but we will try. That difference may seem small, but it changes everything. Joshua and Caleb were courageous because they understood fear was reasonable and moved forward despite it. Courage is often misunderstood. It is mixed with bravery. We often use those 2 words interchangeably, courage and bravery. For bravery, we imagine people who are fearless. The firefighter rushing into a burning building, the activist standing up for injustice, against injustice, the soldier heading into battle. We assume those people act because they are brave. But many people who have done extraordinary things will tell you otherwise. They were terrified, their hands shook, their stomachs churned, their hearts raced, the fear was real. But what distinguished them was not bravery, it was courage. This week I finished Taylor Jenkins Reid's novel, Atmosphere. In it, she writes, bravery is being unafraid of something other people are afraid of. Courage is being afraid, but strong enough to do it anyway. That distinction feels like a commentary on this week's Torah portion. The tragedy of the spies is not that they were afraid. Fear is normal. Fear is human. Fear can even be healthy because it can protect us from danger. The tragedy is that fear became their identity. They lost their courage. Notice the language that they used. We looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, so we must have looked like that to them. That may be one of the saddest verses of the entire Torah. The giants never speak. The Canaanites never mock them. No one calls them grasshoppers. The spies do it to themselves. Before they lose a single battle, they lost their confidence in themselves. Before they are defeated by an enemy, they are defeated by their own imagination. The greatest obstacle was within themselves. And when people see themselves as small, then they act in small ways. Which may explain a famous teaching from Ben Zoma in the Mishnah, Ezehu Gibor Hakoves et Yitzro. Who is strong, or who is a hero? Who is strong? One who masters their own inclinations. The Mishnah shifts our attention from the battlefield to the soul. Real strength is not defeating an enemy. Real strength is refusing to be ruled by fear or ego, anger or despair or self-doubt. Strength in Jewish tradition is not measured by what stands in front of us. It is measured by what resides in us. The strongest person is not the one who exerts their will on others. The strongest person is the one who refuses to become a prisoner of fear. The 10 spies could not conquer the land because they had first already been conquered by themselves. Joshua and Caleb's victory begins long before they entered the promised land. It begins in their inner lives. They see the same giants, they feel the same fear, but they refuse to surrender to it. That is true strength. And perhaps that is one of the central challenges of Jewish life. The Torah never asks us to be fearless. It asks us to be courageous. Psalm 27 ends, Kaveh el Hashem, chazek ve'emetz lebecha, ve'kaveh el Hashem. Hope in God, be strong and of good courage. Hope in God. Fearlessness is an emotion. Courage is a commitment. The Torah does not promise that life will be easy. It promises that meaning can be found even when life is difficult. Again and again, our ancestors move forward without certainty. Abraham leaves home without knowing where he is going. Jacob wrestles with the angel at night. Moses confronts Pharaoh despite every reason to doubt himself. Ruth follows Naomi into an uncertain future. The prophets speak uncomfortable truths despite opposition. None of them are fearless. All of them are courageous. Perhaps that is why Parshat Shlach feels so contemporary. We are living in a moment saturated with anxiety and fear. There is anxiety about politics, about Israel, about anti-Semitism, about our children, about our health, about the direction of the country. Sometimes it feels as though we are standing with the spies, looking at the giants in every direction. And there are giants. The uncertainties are real. The fears are real. But the question remains the same as when the Israelites were in the wilderness. What will we allow to make our decisions? Fear or courage? Will it be the voice that says we are grasshoppers, or the voice that says we will move forward despite fear? There are plenty of forces that profit from fear. We feel it throughout our political landscape today, and there are reasons for Jews to be concerned, but concern is not the same as paralysis. The lesson of Joshua and Caleb is not that the giants are imaginary. It is that fear does not get to make the final decision. The Jewish answer has never been to pretend that everything is fine. That is naive optimism. The Jewish answer is hope, and courage is one of the deepest expressions of hope. Joshua and Caleb embody that hope. The existence of giants does not mean the journey has failed. It means we must step up to gird ourselves for the next steps on our journey. The rabbis called the episode of the spies Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies. Tradition teaches that the report was delivered to Moses on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, the day that would later become associated with so many tragedies in Jewish history. Perhaps the rabbis understood something profound. Our greatest disasters begin long before circumstances defeat us. They begin when fear convinces us that action is impossible. They begin when we surrender our own agency, when we stop believing we can shape the future, when we start calling ourselves grasshoppers. Today feels like a time we need to internalize this anew. Joshua and Caleb remind us that courage begins with a different story, not a story that ignores fear, but a story that refuses to be defined by fear. A story that says the challenges are great, and so are we. A story that says we may be afraid, but fear does not get the final word. So when Ben Zoma asks, who is a Gibor? not the strongest warrior, not the loudest voice, not the person who never feels fear. A gibor is a person who refuses to become a grasshopper in their own eyes. A gibor is a person who sees the giants clearly and still chooses to move forward. A gibor is the person who chooses hope over despair and action over paralysis. The 10 spies saw giants and lost faith in themselves. But may we learn from Joshua and Caleb. May we acknowledge our fears honestly, and may we never allow those fears to define us. May we remember that we are not grasshoppers, and may we live a life of courage each day, even when the path ahead of us is unclear. Shabbat Shalom.